also extend my thanks to Salesforce. Thank you so much. This is a gorgeous space that you have us in. Rebecca did allude to this on the panel. Assurance isn't always the sexiest topic, so please bear with us for these 10 minutes that we have to give you this lightning talk. But I think we left it in a perfect place, actually. And I think we'll get the slides up now. I'm sort of looking at Amy for that. Around RAIM, I hadn't actually heard this framing around responsible AI marketing, but this general notion around how we market products and how we talk about AI tools generally, and how we have labels that demonstrate what they are capable of and what they aren't. So I'm just looking for the slides. To click? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So this is perfect. Let's start with this picture, and I actually have to give credit to one of our collaborators on the project, Sebastian Hallensleben from Rosaro, for this image. So just imagine you walk into a car dealership and you're sort of browsing, you're looking around, you see some cars that you like, and at the back you see this car, which is covered. You recognize the shape, you think it looks great, and you're told that it's the most powerful car. You know, it's a new generation of car that you should be interested in purchasing. But you aren't told much about the specs of the car. So you ask about the engine, for example, and they provide you with some high-level detail. But they mentioned that the engine came from another company. It was slotted into the car, but it's powerful, and you should trust it, and it's great. You have kids, so you ask them about the safety of this vehicle and the safety features for children, and they assure you that it's safe. But they can't confirm the tests exactly that have been done on the car. And they also can't confirm whether tests were done by a third party, but instead assure you that you should trust it. I have to admit that I don't actually have a license. I'm one of those people who live in the city and have been accustomed to taking public transport. But I imagine these are types of questions that I would be asking if I was to buy a car. But I leave you with that question. What information would you want to calibrate your decision making and have trust that the vehicle that you're buying fits your purposes and needs? So this leaves us with this concept around, which I think we're missing a slide, but justified or calibrated trust. And I think David left us with this, that we're not just talking about trust or trustworthiness, we're talking about what we're calling justified or calibrated trust, which is generally just the notion that you should have information about the products or the systems that you use that allow you to calibrate whether you should trust them or not. So whether you're a user, you're a government procurer of a system, you're a downstream deployer, what information do you need? And I was also looking at the Edelman Trust Barometer that Rebecca mentioned in the panel earlier, which mentioned a few things. And they called their year of trust this year the year of grievance. And they talk about actually the linkages between the distrust in institutions and how that's actually affecting citizens' trust of AI. And two specific stats that were in that trust barometer for this year is that citizens or the respondees were asked whether they trust AI, and we saw a 22-point reduction from last year. And they were also asked about whether they would trust the use of AI by businesses, and we saw a 21% reduction. So what does that say? And of course, assurance isn't going to solve all of these problems that we have when it comes to trust in society, but what tools can we give citizens to demonstrate that they should be able to calibrate their own decisions? And trustworthiness isn't sort of a blind faith in this vehicle, but it's giving people the information to make their own decisions that fit their purposes and needs. So we're borrowing the definition of trust from the UK government, which talks about the process of measuring, evaluating, and communicating to something about a system, a process, documentation, a product, and it communicates its trustworthiness. I think we're missing another slide. I'm so sorry about this. There we go. Thank you very much. And assurance isn't a new concept. I think this came up in the panel about whether assurance is an innovation deterrent. And I think you mentioned this too, Nicole, in the panel, that we shouldn't see this as conflicting with innovation. And instead, I think traditionally the way we've engaged with different sectors and products and tools is that you expect there to be tests done. And instead, actually, if we look to the middle, when I think about a car, you know, when I think about seatbelts, when I think about airbags, these are things that instead incentivize me to purchase this product instead of deterring that. And a lot of our partners, I think, looking at Miranda CDT in the room, looking at Microsoft, a lot of our partners have been interested in what lessons we can learn from other sectors and industries. And so here I have a sort of small snapshot of some of the work that's been done recently by Microsoft, looking at the lessons we can take from medical devices, from civil aviation, for example. And what those areas show us is that actually assurance really, really does build robust governance, but also, again, drives innovation. One example being that the more regulators see there being a robust testing and safety and security environment, the less likely they are to put in place really prescriptive regulations. And instead, they trust that there is an ecosystem that works effectively and has the buy-in of civil society and others around it. So where does that take us next? Assurance and justified trust are grounded in specific goals and benefits. We believe that by having greater clarity about critical elements of a model or system, we can help reduce risk with reliable evidence, fundamentally, and we'll have improved products that signal their robustness and security, and signal, again, because something has to be communicated about these products and tools. The next is that we'll also have international alignment and interoperability. And what we've learned from medical devices and civil aviation is that by having robust mechanisms in place in different jurisdictions, you have better interoperability, you have better expectations across countries, and you can have alignment. But I do have a dotted line here, and something that we're specifically interested in at PAI is how do you also ensure that we have this opportunity now to design this ecosystem with the viewpoints and the needs of the global south, global majority in mind. So when we're thinking about the information or the assurance and the tests that should be done, what does that look like in an inclusive and global way? But hopefully we'll see that that would lead to growth and adoption and increased accountability. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about a lot of activities that many of you are very familiar with. We're talking about risk assessments, TEV here, testing, evaluation, validation, verification. I think many folks in this room would have been involved in the work that NIST was doing before the government shut down. I'm saying that specifically because I think it's been paused for the last few weeks. The red teaming, and then again, post-deployment evaluations are part of that too. But it isn't just about testing. I think we're interested in how do you bring this ecosystem together in a way that is robust and mirrors what we've seen in the past. So you have testing evaluation activity, but it includes skills. How do we grow the skills that are necessary? Information coordination and documentation issues. Communication and signaling issues that we have at the moment. So how do you signal and label that we heard in the panel in the most effective way? And then finally, institutional incentives to want to do this and the risk management issues that would be resolved. I'll leave a small note here. We don't have time to go into it, but I was talking to Kathy this morning about AI agents. We think that these risks or challenges will become exacerbated as we have agents deployed. But again, we should actually see assurance as a way to drive better governance, including with agents. So one example is that outside you'll see a QR code for a few things we've released recently, and one is around an agenda for AI agent research. And some of the questions we talk about is the use of assurance for sandboxes and testing to allow us actually to better understand agent capabilities and how they might better be governed by policymakers. What types of attribution, for example, or agent IDs, how could those best be put in place? And how can assurance help us design that most effectively in the future? The last thing I'll quickly say, the last two things, is that we see this in policy frameworks, but again, the issue that we're seeing is fragmentation. So across the AI Act, the G7 Code of Conduct, and the UK's assurance framework, you do have assurance already reflected in there, but there's a lack of specificity, or in some cases, they don't talk about assurance in exactly the same way. So what work can we do to help kind of mitigate some of those issues around fragmentation? And then the last thing I'll quickly say before I pass to John is around the value chain. The fact that we do recognize that this is a pretty complex challenge and that assurance needs to reflect the needs of different stakeholders across this value chain. So one example being that if I'm a model adapter or optimizer, what information do I need from that foundation model provider? And if I'm a user, what signaling should I expect from that model adapter or the deployer? And here specifically, what role can third-party assurance providers play, both in doing and facilitating the assessment and verification, but providing the information that is necessary to help people calibrate their trust? So with that, I will pass to John, who will talk to you about our roadmap and plan to overcome some of this fragmentation.
Thanks, Steph. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to go down into the weeds a little bit. Steph's given us a great précis of how assurance can build justified trust in foundation models and systems built on foundation models. And she's also started to discuss where we're at the moment in policy frameworks. We do see that there is, in fact, fragmentation in the way assurance is being approached. But we're also seeing that the full value of AI assurance is not being realised now because there is fragmentation in how the assurance industry, how professional assurers inside organisations are approaching their task as well. And we have set out at PAI to try and address some particular priority areas where we can help overcome that fragmentation and help develop, accelerate the assurance ecosystem in the shorter term. So to explain what we're talking about here, I'm going to go right back to basics and thinking about what is AI assurance. Many of you here, maybe all of you know already. There may be a few who are just sort of hearing the word assurance and falling asleep. So this maybe will be relevant to one or two people. At its core, for assurance to work, what we need is a set of expectations, clear idea of what we want our AI to do and not do. Then we need some way to check whether the AI is behaving as we want it to, and then we need people to reliably do that checking. In a classical, like sort of gold-plated assurance framework, we might have a full suite of international standards setting out how we want AI to be developed and how we want it to function. We'd have a scientifically robust set of tools and techniques to assess our AI. Those would be embedded in standards. We would have a deep field of expertise, many assurance providers, many different skills, who would all be accredited to apply the relevant standards under national accreditation schemes. And if we look at where we're at the moment in terms of AI assurance, we see we don't have the standards, we don't have agreement about all of the tools that we need. That doesn't mean that assurance can't be really effective now in addressing risks and making AI work more reliably, but it does mean that we have uncertainty about what good looks like. We get a diversity of different practices. People are using perhaps in-house tools. The results of assurance are less comparable, therefore less useful. We end up with a more mixed quality of assurance output, and we end up with less confidence that assurance is going to be useful and do what the people who might be acquiring assurance want it to do. So to try and overcome some of these challenges and build out reliable assurance while we wait for all of the necessary scientific research and standards to come online, we've identified 3 areas of work which we think that actors in the policy space and AI space can take to help promote assurance now. The issues we've identified are growing demands and incentives for assurance, so making it clear to people that assurance can do what they need it to do. A variety of levers have been suggested. Some of those are legislative, some might be through procurement and investment frameworks, others might simply be through levers, traditional levers like insurance. We also need ways to build justified trust in assurers, perhaps through professionalisation, clear codes of practice and so on. And we need to make sure that assurers can get access to the information they need right across the value chain. Now, we are running a little bit behind, so I'm going to leave it there as a lightning tour of the assurance ecosystem in our work, and I think we might have time for a couple of questions.
My name is Natalia Luca. I'm part of the Responsible AI Initiative at UC Berkeley. And my question is to both of you. What is the role of education and literacy that you see in the concept of assurance? And I'll run with the metaphor that Stephanie brought up with something like a car, for instance. We have 100 years of consumers interacting with the automobile industry and learning things like what four-wheel drive means. And AI for most people is brand new, and we don't have that, depth of knowledge from consumers yet, and end users more broadly. So how are you thinking about that education component and that kind of catch-up that has to happen for assurance to matter in the ways that you're talking about?
Maybe I'll mention something very quickly about education, and then I think John can speak to the professionalization element. I do think that's a great example. Other sectors or examples used, for example, by the UK government as food labels. I'm not sure that each of us, every time we buy a product in the supermarket, we're looking at the sort of food labels on the back, you know, to calibrate whether, you know, this is good for us, should we purchase it. But I do think that you're right, that we've seen that there is a trust that comes from having access to that information, but you also need to be able to understand what it actually means. So I know we're short on time, but absolutely, I think education will be a fundamental part of that. Once we design the labels, how should people interpret it? What types of information should be publicly accessible? And what level of specificity is needed for citizens versus other people in the value chain. So for example, if I'm a deployer, maybe I would need more information than the end user because I'm trying to procure a specific product. So great question, but I think that this will absolutely be a core part of it.